Holy cow, it's a big fish. Holy cow. Today we are going to talk about all things high water, and it's spring runoff season here in Montana, as you can tell by the color of the water behind me. And we were actually running into these situations quite a lot in New York before I left as well. We just had a very rainy spring, and it seemed like leading into the weekend the water was always high, it was always dirty. And if you were looking to get out there and waiting for clear conditions, it just wasn't happening. So I was getting some questions on how to fish in high water, what areas to target, what to do. And that's kind of our goal today. That's what I want to cover and what we're going to talk about. So first and foremost, you want to consider where you're going to fish before you head out. And typically what you're going to be looking for is nice, slow water. You know, these fish, they don't want to be in a big treadmill all day. They don't want to be expending all that energy just to stay in one place. They want to move into that slow water where they can feed and they can grow and they're not stressed all the time. So you're going to look for slow water. And typically where you're going to find that most often is near the bank. A lot of times I'm going to be kind of out in the river, kind of casting back towards the bank, towards like little slow pockets. Or I'll be looking for a big boulder with a giant kind of eddy behind it, something like that. Or a big one and a good one are the inside of hard turns. So anytime the river makes a hard turn, or there's like a point jutting out into the river, you'll get a nice slow seam behind that, and those fish will stack kind of in that soft water. You know, they have plenty of food coming down the river that gets caught in the eddy and they can eat, and then they're just sitting there relaxing as well. There's a nice high water rainbow. Bigger fish. Two nice rainbows stacked on top of each other. Feisty. Oh, got him. Wrapped himself in the net like an idiot. Thank you, sir. So one of the mistakes I see my clients make is they'll pick up their casts early, like kind of down here. And if you notice where I caught that last fish, it was all the way down here. So especially in dirty water, when these fish are having a harder time seeing your flies, the longer your flies are in the water, the better. I mean, I think that's true in any situation, but especially in this dirty water situation. And what I'll see is a lot of times in like, this isn't quite an eddy because we're getting some good flow from right to left, but in an eddy, like their bobber, you know, I'll typically have my clients indicator fish, their bobber or their rig will kind of eddy out, or even sometimes it'll just stall, and they'll be quick to kind of just pull it out and recast. And I mean, if you have an eddy that's recirculating, I mean, you might as well just let that eddy just take your flies and just keep swirling it in front of the fish's face Or if it's stagnant, just kind of let those flies just keep hanging out there. You know, every now and again, I might just give the bobber just a little tug, or your rig a little tug, just to make sure you're not hooked on the bottom. But the longer your flies are in the water, I mean, if you can't catch them when your flies are out of the water, so you might as well just leave them in there. The other thing is people don't believe me how close the fish will sit to you. And that fish was just underneath my rod tip, and I think this might be the biggest one yet. Thanks, buddy. I mean, just on the topic of fish being close, I mean, the water's so dirty, the fish can't see you. The only thing I might be a little concerned about is casting a shadow if the sun gets behind me. But the reality is, in this color water, the fish, they can't see you, especially when the water is disturbed on the top like this. So, I mean, you can catch them at your feet. All right, so I put my Euro rod down, and I got the indicator rod out. And I had a video just absolutely blow up on Facebook, a little short, about a bobber, indicator, blah, 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 just bait fishing. The reality is I could care less the tactic. I just like to catch fish, and I like my clients to catch fish as well. So I really don't care. I'm not a purist. So the one thing I do like about the indicator, other than the Euro, in some of this slow water, now there's some pretty good movement to this little spot right here. But sometimes in really slow water, what you have to do with the Euro rig is you actually have to drag your flies yourself, and you have to be the one that's moving them down the river, which can be a little bit challenging for some people. And so a lot of times, not a lot of times, but how I guide this time of year is I actually use the indicator, and I just throw that out there, and I basically just have them high stick, like they're almost Euroing, or you could just put a bobber on the end of your Euro rig. But I run really short. I do run 2 flies instead of 1. But I just make casts upstream, follow that bobber, kind of lift my rod as it comes back. I see any movement, I set the hook on that indicator. Now, a lot of people will they'll get snagged on the bottom. You're gonna hit the bottom a lot. Whether you're Euroing or whether you're indicator fishing, just because you're fishing so shallow. I mean, even if you swear that you're hooking the bottom, even if you swear, I would still set the hook. You know, those snags, that debris in the water, yeah, you're gonna hook it 6 times. But the reality is there also, that might have been a fish. It might have been a fish. But the reality is they're also using that debris for structure. They'll be sitting in front of it or behind it. And you know, you'll set the 7th time and you're, oh, there's that same stick again. And you'll set the 7th time and it'll be a fish. So, you know, if you do it 20 or so times, you know, maybe at that point you want to move on. But, you know, you do it once or twice, like, don't give up on it. You know, be persistent. You know, and even with how many casts you make, you know, I make more casts in this colored water than I make if the water was clear. You know, for me to catch those 4 fish, you know, that took how many casts? You know, I probably would have only taken that amount of casts kind of through this whole run if the water was clear. Oop, that must have been bottom. Whatever it was, I was slow on it, I can tell you that much. So, and then when it comes to casting, what I'll do a lot of times is people struggle when there's get stuff behind them or if you get a tree overhanging. Now, I don't have much behind me right now, but what I'll have them do is I'll actually have them turn their hips upstream, and then you just get a nice and tall rod, and then you just snap and point your rod right up along the bank. You know, we're fishing just tight to the bank, so I'll let them have their drift, kind of bring it all the way down. I'll let the water load the rod. I get my rod nice and tight, nice and tall. I bend my elbow, and you just snap and point. And everything lays out nice in front of you. As that indicator comes back, I just lift my rod, And then as it goes by, you can start to lower it. If ever you're gonna get to a snag, just lift your rod tip. And now my flies are dragging again, I'm good to recast. You know, the one nice thing about the indicator system is I get much longer drifts. You know, this is probably twice the distance upstream that I was getting on the Euro. And then I do like the ability to fish 2 flies as well. I just think because the indicator drags your rig, I think you're gonna snag less with 2 flies on this rig than you would on the Euro. I think if you fish 2 flies on the Euro, you just snag every cast. Now hook sets too. You know, on the Euro, you can get away with kind of a soft, kind of sad hook set, just because you're already in contact with everything. Even still, I like a good firm hook set, but especially on the indicator, you know, you want as much line off the water as possible. So as soon as you see that indicator go down, you're setting that hook so hard that those flies are flying out of the water. If your flies are not flying out of the water on your hook set, you're not setting hard enough. And then you can use that back cast. You know, if you're just hooking bottom and ripping it off the bottom, you just use that hook set kind of as your false cast to get your next cast out. Holy cow, it's a big fish. Holy cow. It's a hammer of a fish. Holy crap. Yeah, buddy. And here's precisely why you don't stay home and you go out and fish high water. Beautiful, beautiful brown. So let's talk rigging real quick. So when I'm Euro nymphing in high water, I do like just 1 fly. You know, you might get into some of these pockets with some weird currents, and 2 flies might cause your flies to kind of move around, you know, not to quite have that much contact with them. So I'll typically fish just 1 fly. I will also size up my fly pattern, and we're gonna talk about flies, but I'll size up my fly pattern. And then like what I'm using today is just a single fly with a 3.0 millimeter bead, tungsten bead. And kind of one of the mistakes I used to make very early on is I fish beads that are too heavy. And what just happens is you're just hitting the bottom the whole time and like you're striking on everything. Which you do, you want to strike on everything, but you also don't want to be snagging the bottom every time. You want your fly to get down. And because we're fishing such slow water, you can do that with a smaller bead size. So this 3.0 has been perfect today. If you need to, you might even need to drop to a 2.5. But I do think that's a common error for beginners, and I make it myself a lot as well, is just fishing bead heads that are too heavy in this kind of water, in high water. You know, your thought process is the water's high and up, you know, I need more weight. Because we're fishing that slow water, the reality is you don't actually need more weight. You can often get away with less weight. So my sighter marker is right here. We're gonna run a pretty shallow distance. So the end of my sighter marker is just about a bow draw. So from my fingertips to my chest. And, you know, even when I was out there fishing, and I probably had another like 6 to 8 inches of you know, below my sighter held out of the water, and really only had maybe this distance here that was actually under the water. So then with my bobber rig, I will actually fish 2 flies on my bobber rig, just because I think this sits on the surface and pulls everything a little bit faster than my Euro rig. You can get away with the double fly and have kind of 2 options or 2 flies to put in front of the fish's face. especially when the water's dirty and you're kind of hurting to kind of get the flies right in front of their face so they can see it. So, but still very short. So this is my indicator right here. My first fly is right here at my left hand, tied off of a tag. And then normally I run 20 inches. Here I only have about a foot between my two flies. So really close together, really close to the bobber. Again, we're not fishing very deep water. Now I do have 2 3mm beads on here. Again, I do think they compete getting down and kind of in the different currents. So I don't think having that extra weight really impacts a whole lot. Just fishing through where I was just fishing, I didn't hit the bottom more with the indicator than I did with the Euro. The one thing I will say is you'll probably set a lot more on this rig, which is fine. I mean, the water's dirty and hook sets are free. That's why I like to tell my clients hook sets are free. You're really not spooking anything in these kind of conditions by setting the hook too much. Now it might be a little annoying, and if it is too annoying, you might want to downsize your flies. But as far as rigging, that's kind of what I do for the Euro and for the indicator. Now let's talk flies here. So when high water first starts, you're gonna see me pull out this box that's labeled junk. And so what's in there is I just have a bunch of stone flies, bunch of eggs, mop flies, worms, in some heavier weights, lighter weights. I have some streamers in there as well. This is where I'm gonna typically start when we get high water. I'm gonna start in this box and then kind of adjust from there. Here in Montana, we have a lot of stone flies in the river. So Pat's rubber legs, a TJ hooker, those are gonna be typically one of the first flies that goes on my rig. And then from there, I'll probably change what my second fly is on the indicator rig to kind of mix things up. So, maybe I'll start with a rubber leg and a worm behind it, or a rubber leg and a small mop behind it. If it's early season, I know the rainbows have just gotten off a spawn, I'll probably start with an egg behind it. But from there, I'm just gonna kind of cycle through some stuff. And what I kind of ran into, one of my first days back is, had the rubber legs on, was cycling through my normal junk stuff, and it just wasn't quite working. And so what I did was I left the rubber legs on because I knew there was a high probability of there being rubber legs in there. And then I kind of went into some of my natural nymphs, and I did these in a bigger size. So the first one I put on was a Guide's Choice Hare's Ear, and in a size 14, size 12, size 14, a bigger size Hare's Ear. And almost instantly we put a fish in the net. And then kept working through, put another natural Hare's Ear on the other person's rig. All the fish were eating the Hare's Ear, none were eating the stone fly. So we take the stone fly off. And then I put one of these bigger blow torches, size 14 blow torch on the back. And now we started to catch fish on both flies. So I'll typically start with those bigger junk flies, especially on the East Coast. I like mops, I like eggs. Worms, we don't have a lot of stone flies on the East Coast like we do here in Montana, but you get a fish, especially a stocked fish that doesn't know what he's doing, you put that big dark rubber leggy fly in front of them, they will eat it. Then there's certainly a few rivers on the East Coast that do have really good stonefly populations where that would be a great first option. But we're really not trying to reinvent the wheel too much. Kind of your basic nymph patterns, just beefed up a couple sizes, will do just fine. A big pheasant tail, we're gonna have green drakes on the river here soon. A big soft tackle pheasant tail, like a size 12, size 10 pheasant tail will do great. Those big caddis patterns, bigger size Frenchies. Typically, I'm not throwing Paragons a lot this time of year just because I want some movement added into the flies, kind of that Hungarian partridge on the Guide Choice Hare's Ear. Lots of extra movement so the fish can see it, the rubber legs on your rubber legs. If I tie a pheasant tail with some CDC around the collar, or the CDC around the collar of the blowtorch, something with some movement, and then that kind of hot spot on the tag for my blowtorch, and then there is a red collar on the Guide's Choice Hare's Ear. Just something to help those fish see that fly and also trigger a strike. So again, not trying to reinvent the wheel here, just kind of beef up your normal nymph patterns and maybe try some brighter flies, some mops, some eggs, some stone flies, some worms, and see what can happen. But my advice would be is if you are fishing a pocket that's really good, this is kind of one of the better pieces of water that you've been fishing and you're not catching a fish, I would change your flies maybe a couple times before you move on. but also this time of year and in these situations, especially, you know, we have a lot of fish here in Montana, but if I'm on the East Coast and we don't have as many fish, you're gonna wanna work through these pockets much quicker kind of than I have been today, because there's not necessarily a fish in those pockets. So you wanna go hit the next pocket for a few casts and try to find where those fish are. And you know, the more water you cover, the more chance you have of putting your fly in front of a fish and putting a fish in the net. So I'm trying to think if I missed anything. I don't know off the top of my head, but if there's something that I didn't cover or something that you want to go further into or have questions about, go ahead and leave me a comment in the comments section, and I'll try to answer that to the best of my ability, maybe in a separate video or in the comments themselves. And you know, would love to hear what you have. Any feedback on the video is muchly appreciated. Go ahead and drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, all that fun stuff. I appreciate you guys making it to the end, and we'll see you in the next one.